One thing I was most worried about in the weeks leading up to the 2020 election was that the left clearly had a comprehensive plan, and we weren't ready for it. We didn't appear to even know about it. I was all but screaming for people to pay attention. But even I didn't know how in-depth the entire thing really was. We now know that their plan was spearheaded primarily by this guy, Michael Podhorzer. I remember because pod as in podcast, whore as in whore, and zer as in, I don't know, my pronoun. Anyway, he's from the AFL-CIO and a massive conglomeration of over 200 progressive groups called the Democracy Defense Coalition. Well, their planning included the election night war game that I told you about before the break. Teams of lawyers ready to spring into action and massive street demonstrations to help push public opinion. The entire strategy was laid out by AFL-CIO Michael Podhorzen in a secret internal memo. Winning an election was broken down into 5 steps, and I want to show you. These are the 5 steps that they outlined, and it's been since summarized in places like Time Magazine. Remember when I told you it was a conspiracy theory until Time Magazine took the whole thing after the election and broke it down into 5 steps. Now, in the context of today, we're going to use this because nothing really has changed. They break it down into winning the vote. Now, that might sound rather benign and obvious, but pandemic-era voting made this a much bigger event than any other election in history. Election laws were getting changed. Massive mail-in voting was getting pushed alongside things like ballot harvesting and drop boxes. Battalions of lawyers were employed by the left to ensure that this would go unchecked back in 2020. And it's the same exact strategy today. Kamala has already promised teams of lawyers at the ready. Democratic Mayor Marc Elias, lawyer Marc Elias, he stopped over 60 election-related lawsuits last time. But now there are more. Here's Marc Elias on what's in store for us in the days and weeks ahead.
It's only mid-October, and there have already been 179 election lawsuits in 38 states filed this year, meaning that 2024 has already been the most litigious year for election and voting cases in American history.
I mean, look at this guy. He loves this crap. 179 election-related lawsuits spanning 38 states just this year. He's calling it the most litigious election in American history. And he should know, because they're his. The election hasn't even happened yet. Get ready, because it is coming. All the things that make us question the election, the mass mail-in voting, drop boxes, harvesting, all of that is part of first step, winning the vote. The fight goes on. Think how bad this is going to be next Wednesday if it's not a blowout, the day after the election. But it's not just operatives like Elias. This time, Biden and Harris Department of Justice is joining in on all of the fun. The DOJ has already sued Virginia, Alabama, and Wisconsin. They've already said that they're going to be showing up at all of the polling places and the vote counting places in Arizona. Why? Well, these states had the gall to remove non-citizens from voter rolls and switch to only paper ballots and hand counting. Seems pretty reasonable, but that doesn't fit into step 1, winning the vote. So they'll be there. Step 2, winning the count. This is important. Normally, this would be benign, but not anymore in America. This is why they'll say at some point on Monday night, well, we're not going to hear the final tally tonight. Really? Wow, that's weird. These progressives keep going backward in time. If the votes are legitimate, why make such a big deal out of this? Why does it take so long? Now, think about the left's mindset here. Election laws are now shady. A vast amount of the country doesn't trust mail-in voting, drop boxes, and harvesting. There are going to be disputes, and they have the teams of lawyers ready to go. The 2020 election war game mentioned multiple recounts to be called in for swing states. I think that's probably a given this time. How controversial will it be? And will Democrats ever accept the results? The next few weeks are going to be dominated by the lawyers, and we need to be prepared for that, because the next steps are when things start to get crazy. 3, winning the certification. Now, this is only an issue if they expect that the vote count will be so contentious that there's a major controversy. Before this, on January 6th, remember, I think it's December 18th, they have to seat the electors. Well, there's already talk that they're not going to seat the electors. Speaker Johnson stated recently that he expects Democrats to object to the electoral count if Trump wins. He didn't say, yeah, well, maybe, probably. They might. He said he expects it to happen. And Democrats like Jamie Ruskin have already signaled that that might be the plan, if Trump interferes with the process. And that goes into step 4, winning the Electoral College. Representative Raskin said Trump is, quote, doing whatever he can to try to interfere with the process, whether we're talking about manipulating the Electoral College counts in Nebraska or manipulating the vote count in Georgia. Just watch. They will claim the Trump campaign is engaging in some sort of shadiness with the electors and the Electoral College. And just like that, they'll have their reason to upend certification on January 6th. We are all being primed for this. I don't know. Did you see the article from Politico? It was the very real scenario where Trump loses and takes power anyway. Really? Are you kidding me? Read this article in full, because I have a sneaky suspicion that they will try and accuse Trump of every single thing that is listed in here. One of them is to, quote, he will rely on congressional Republicans to endorse these alternate electors when they convene to certify the outcome. By the way, if it's the other way, Democrats will do exactly the same thing, but it won't be a big deal because they did it. He will try to ensure that Harris is denied 270 votes in the Electoral College, sending the election to the House, where Republicans are likely to have the numbers to choose Trump as the next president. They clearly have a plan, and it feels like we are being set up here. And finally, the very last step is winning the transition. I don't even know what that means. Wouldn't the election be considered over at that point? Well, not according to the left's playbook. They state, quote, winning the transition, steps that are normally formalities, but they knew that Trump would see as opportunities for disruption. What they accuse the U.S. of, or accuse us of, are things that they're already doing or have plans to do in the future. I don't know what they're cooking up, but don't rest easy if Trump wins, because we get all of this all the way through the transition. To the GOP and the Trump team, please, I hope you're prepared. I hope you have a buttload of attorneys ready and have read all of these documents. Throughout all of this, the left planned in 2020 to back everything up with waves and waves of street rioters. This included, and I quote, bail funds that could be activated in response to mass arrests, then had readied for separate fund to raise money for the families of anyone killed in violence or on or around Election Day. Wow, sounds peaceful. You're going to give people money if they were killed in those transitions of power? As I mentioned earlier, back in 2020, they had a map of all of the demonstrations planned out all over the country. But oddly, most of these progressive groups have been rather quiet lately. Are they not planning anything, or are they staying under the radar? Well, my next guest, I think, might have an answer for us. She's next. Joining me now is journalist and author Asra Nomani. She is a former Wall Street Journal reporter, a former Georgetown journalism professor, among many other things on her resume. She is also an expert on Islamic extremism, terrorism, and countering radicalization. Most recently, she's been digging into the malign foreign influence behind the anti-Israel protest movement. Asra, welcome to the program. Let me start with what you're doing right now. This movement on our campuses has been a lot quieter than they promised to be last spring during the fall. Is that coordinated with the left? Is that going to pose a bigger problem once the election happens?
Oh, it's absolutely coordinated with the left. The Islamists, as you know, are the radical Muslims who want to not only overthrow the United States, but the state of Israel. And so they came together in this network that I call the woke army, the red, which is the communists, and the green, which is the Islamists. And Glenn, you've been a leader in, educating people about this. And I know that you could never have imagined it would have played out like it has over the last year, but they are not going away. I just read another tweet by somebody related to the election next week saying, we will never stop. We will never stop until this system is destroyed. And what is the system that they hate? From the left is the capitalists, and from the Islamist side, it is the freedoms that we know. And so I see them gearing up for next week. Glenn, I just watched your segment just now, and you are calling it spot on. People need to be aware.
I really hate to hear that. You
hate to be a good fortune teller, right?
Yeah, I know. Well, because I don't ever tell good fortunes.
Yeah.
So tell me, is there a way to escape all of this? Is there something that could happen next week? A landslide for one side or the other?
Well, Donald Trump absolutely needs to win by a landslide if we are to not see the chaos that you are predicting. Okay. It is going to go from the courts to the streets, just as you're laying out. And I just sent a request for comment from our friend, Marc Elias, because, it's so ironic. This man who is a lawyer and presenting himself as a defender of democracy is the soldier really in the courts performing this legal warfare, and he's very proud of it. But the irony that I asked him for comment about is that he gets money through sources that we don't know. He is always railing against dark money, and yet he has funds, millions of dollars of money coming in through that network that you've also educated people about called the Arabella Network. And why does that matter to what you're saying? Because in the courts, we have a multi-million-dollar effort to try to undo any victory that might happen by Donald Trump. And then in the streets, I know that the far left and the Islamists are gearing up to hit the streets in protest. They want chaos. And the project that you mentioned is because they want to influence our democracy.
So in a minute, I'm going to show the latest of what we can find on their plan for this time around, and it's not pretty. What advice do you have? I mean, you're part of your education and what you do is trying to dismantle extremism. What's the best thing that the Trump supporter can do when they're watching their country burn down, if that happens?
Well, I take a lesson from Martin Luther King's Nonviolence Project. He says the first thing that we have to do in any effort is educate. And so I'm going to quickly inoculate folks to what they're going to see next week. So this is a poster from Donald Trump's victory in 2016. And you laid out for folks how this was played out in 2020, but it went as far back as 2016. Immediately, the Muslim organizations came out with these slick and glossy posters about their Muslim vote. And what did they immediately do? They galvanized on the streets with the far left. And these are the images, right, that we love of a democracy, the Statue of Liberty, and what they talked about was the alleged Muslim ban that they were hyperbolic about. Yeah. And what they had is their convenient hashtag. So people need to understand that this is an orchestrated effort, first of all, and that it is led by institutions and organizations, many of them getting support from like-minded ideologues in China, Iran, Russia, and even North Korea. And so, first of all, know that this is not just spontaneous, as CNN and MSNBC will report. I'll be there at the White House and I will see these signs, just like the ones I'm going to show you right here. What is that about? It's about Iran. And this was after Donald Trump came to office, and it was about Iran. Diplomacy makes us safer. And it was about diplomacy with the theocrats of Iran. And what's the fine print, Glenn? Can you read it?
MoveOn.org, it looks like.
It's moveon.org.
Jeez.
And what was moveon.org? Yeah. What was moveon.org? It was created after President Bill Clinton got into a little bit of trouble, and the left and the Democrats wanted to move on.org. Yeah. And so if Donald Trump has a victory on Tuesday, they will want to move on to repeal that victory. So just like you said, a landslide is needed.
Let me ask you, you have written about how this coalition is kind of shaking apart, and you're seeing it with the Muslim communities. Tell me about, is it shaken apart enough to break it, or what are you seeing?
Well, it's such shifting alliances, and they are not to be trusted. So what has happened right now is, for two issues, the traditional Islamist and Muslim establishments are breaking away from the Democratic Party. And so one issue was after October 7th, and the Democratic Party didn't, go all in supporting Hamas. And then the second issue was this war on children that's happening in K through 12 schools. So former President Trump received a ringing endorsement from Muslim organizations and imams even in Michigan this last weekend. And they cited the schools and K through 12 curriculum as one of the reasons why they were aligning now with Donald Trump. And then the second issue is that we have Muslims who are saying that they will not vote for Kamala Harris, but they're going for Jill Stein or Cornel West. And they're called uncommitted, but they're shifting that way. And I want to just show people how they are going after the Democratic Party. They created this poster in which they coined "Stop Genocide Joe" and "Stop Killer Kamala." Wow. Because how are they united? They want to destroy the West. Yeah. So that's why I know it's sometimes easy to say, oh, they're always in bed with the Democrats. But the truth is, they're going to throw the Democrats under the bus, just like they always do, to get to their end goal.
Asra, I'd love to have you. America. I'd love to have you on either later this week or early next week to prepare as many people as possible to be ready for what is coming next week. I pray for a landslide, but I don't know how likely that is. But you're right, it's going to take that to be able to survive this like a normal election, I fear. Asra, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Glenn. Thanks for all your work.
You bet. By the way, the name of her book is Woke Army, and everything she's written is very well worth the read.